In today's video, I'm going to give you my top 5 tips for fishing with a spinning rod. Hi, I'm Captain Chris Meyer, Central Florida Sight Fishing Charters. I do inshore saltwater fishing trips here in the Central Florida area. And what I use mostly when I'm not doing fly fishing trips is we're using light tackle spinning rods. It's a very versatile tool, and I'm going to give you my top 5 tips on how to use these things. Having done fishing charters for almost 20 years now, what I've seen is that the number one reason people don't catch more fish than they could have is they never really learned how to operate this reel efficiently and make quick, accurate casts on a consistent basis. So in today's video, we're going to go over the things that I think are most important when you're starting off using this reel, or maybe you've been using it for quite a while and not getting the results that you think you deserve. Check out these tips and be sure to become a subscriber for additional tips on fishing in the future. Tip number 1 is learning to get a proper grip of the spinning reel, which will help with some of our other tips coming later on. And what I found to be most effective, if you're a right-handed angler, grab the stem, the seat of the reel, the part that's going up from the reel to the rod, in between your 4th and 5th finger. So they should be in between your 4th and 5th finger. I find lots of people have learned or just picked up a rod and they grab it in between their 1st and 2nd finger, which causes some additional problems. So if you learn to grab this in between your 4th and 5th finger, then you'll find it'll rest right up against your forearm when you're fighting a fish. But more importantly, your index finger is going to be above the spool. If I hold it down here, I cannot reach that line unless you got really, really big hands, which forces you to have to bring this hand into the equation, which we don't want to do. Just like you're shaking hands, grab it. The spinning reel is designed to be held underneath the rod. We would never, ever put our spinning reel on top like this. If you're a left-hand angler, you hold it in your left hand. All the handles can be switched over so you can retrieve it with the right hand. Right-hand anglers, hold it in your right hand, cast with your right hand, reel with your left. Tip number 2 is how to properly prepare for a cast. And with a spinning reel, they have a bail. The bail flips. Some of them click when they flip up, but you have to manually flip that up with your left hand if you're a right-handed angler. What's very important is where this little piece, the roller is, the line roller, the piece that wraps the line around the spool, that thing should be directly under the rod before you flip that open. If we go back to tip number 1 with our finger, before we make that flip, we need to grab that line and put it underneath our finger. You do not need to pinch it up against the rod. You don't need to use 2 or 3 fingers. You don't have to hold it with this hand. Just your index finger, barely touch it on there. If you cannot reach that line because the line is way out here, you take your other hand, rotate it around until you can. We do not in any circumstance want to take this hand, if I can't reach the line, put it across the top of the spool and grab it with my finger, or take my hand off, reach up here, grab it, pull it across the top of the spool, because then when you flip it up, it's very likely that it's caught on the spool, and it will also cause this bail in the middle of the cast to slam shut and have your cast land far short of where you want it to be. Proper grip, finger above the spool, rotate the spool till you can grab that line with your finger, barely put it on there, and then you flip the bail open. Once it's open, you can see I'm not pinching that against the rod. This line isn't going anywhere until I move my finger. So this is how we are prepared for the cast. In addition, we want to make sure we have a proper amount of line outside our tip. If we reel our line up all the way, where we only have several inches or no line outside the tip, as I got here, It's pretty good for trying to skip things up underneath trees, docks, etc. It's not very good for distance and accuracy. If I leave a ton of line out like this, it's as long as the reel, and I'm going to make a standard overhand cast, can get pretty far. It's going to be very inaccurate. If you want to know more about casting, you can check out my top 5 casts that every spinning angler should know for a variety of different casting styles. But let's just assume for now we're making a standard overhead cast. Get about 2 to 3 feet of line. That'll give you a good combination of distance and accuracy. Proper grip, finger on there, flip it open, and we're ready to move on to tip number 3. So tip number 3 is making a cast. And when we're making a cast, we want to treat the tip of this rod as if it's our arm throwing an object. If we want to make a short throw, we only need to make a short hand arm movement. If we want to make a long throw, we make a very long one. Want to make a mid-length one, it's in the middle. We're always adjusting our casting stroke and length depending on how far we need to cast. And just like throwing something, we want to throw the tip of that rod in a straight line and not a half a circle. So you'd find it very awkward to take a ball or any other object and throw it up over the top in an arc shape, but many people take their fishing rod and reach it all the way down into the ground or water behind them and cast up, over, and around and make a huge arc. When I'm casting this rod, it doesn't matter whether I'm casting it sidearm, 3/4, straight over the top, backhand. The tip of this rod will go in a straight line from here out to there. So if we can imagine this is a dark straight line in the sky, this is my rod tip. It goes across that straight line to make my cast, not down in a curve. And if I do that, if I want to make a straight overhand cast, my rod tip starts here. It doesn't start way down here because then I'm wasting a bunch of stroke and I wind up with a cast that goes super high in the air, not too far out. But if we bring it just behind our head, it goes out a very long way without having to have it go up and waste part of my casting distance traveling around and high instead of out towards the target. Tip number 4 is what to do just before this cast hits the water and as soon as it does hit the water. We already talked about holding this line with your finger. We're not going to pinch it up on the rod. And when the rod tip is traveling the direction I want it to go, I'm going to release that finger. I'm just going to straighten it out. That lets the line go, flows off the spool out towards my target. Just before it's going to hit the water, I'm going to stick my finger right back in the same position it is and not let any additional line flow off that spool. The momentum of my lure will pull this line tight because I always want to begin my retrieve with a tight line. If I got a bite right away, second it hits the water, which can happen, I want to be able to set that hook immediately and not waste a bunch of my hook set pulling out slack. So if we watch this in action out, it's going to take a few casts practice. We don't want to do it too early. We don't want to do it too late. Just as it's touching the water, put my finger back there. Otherwise, the momentum of this line will pull additional wraps off my spool. Then I'm going to have loose line to deal with. And we do not, under any circumstance, want to reel up loose line onto our spool. You'll wind up getting the dreaded wind knot, which really wasn't caused by the wind. It was caused by you reeling it up on your spool without having tension on there. So it'll take a little bit of practice, but every single cast I make, no matter what style of cast I'm using, I'm always stopping it with my finger, and I can even move that lure while I'm taking time to get the bail closed. Because the second part of this tip is what are we going to do to close the bail. All spinning reels, except for a few models, and I wish there were a lot more of them, but still most of them are made that once you flip this bail open, you can turn the handle and it closes it. But it turns it very quick and rapidly, and it can take the line and wrap that line around places you don't want it to be. What I would recommend, and what has been much more effective for me and has saved a ton of money not having, avoiding knots in the line, is to close that spool by hand. You open it with your hand, close it back with your hand. Do not turn the handle to close that thing. You will save yourself a ton of money, especially if you're using braided line. I'm always casting with two hands unless I'm making very, very short casts. If I've got any kind of distance, I'm using two hands. But as soon as I straighten out that finger and the line's taking off, I don't need this bottom hand anymore. It comes right up here, ready to flick that spool closed the instant that thing contacts the water. So if we put this all together in one, I got my two hands, I'm gonna make my cast, stop the line, flick it closed on the handle. And if there was debris, grass, something I didn't want to get caught in below the surface, I didn't want it getting down to the bottom, I need to be able to move that lure right away. A lot of times we fish over grass, there's sticks or other objects in the water, and we want our lure just below the surface, not diving down into the obstruction. We have to have a way to start retrieving that thing. The instant it stops going out, we're bringing it back. I can do that with my finger and by quickly getting my hand on there. So again, out, top close on it. Now sometimes we want to let it sink down. That's fine, we can stop, close, and let it sink. But if we need to get it moving, that's how we're going to do it. But every cast, you want to get in that habit so that you don't even have to think about it. Out, on. If I needed to wait, then I wait. Then we can begin our retrieve. And my final tip for spinning rod anglers is learn how to take care of your equipment. I've had this rod, I do fishing charters with it. Hundreds of people have used this rod. I've owned it for probably 15 years, still in excellent condition. A couple of things that I see on a regular basis are people take their lure and they reel it all the way up full speed up into the tip of their rod. You're taking that metal, slamming it into this usually ceramic material or some kind of material that's nice and slick and smooth, and you're taking the chance of putting a gouge in it. You do that, then your line is rubbing on that scratch, gouge, whatever you did to it, and you can end up wearing out your line. Do not ever purposely reel this thing up inside your tip. Also, we do not want to take our lures with a hook, a metal hook, and stick our metal hook up inside this circle that was designed for fishing line. A lot of rods have a little holder right here where you can stick your hook on it when you're done storing it. If you don't have that, use one of the legs of your guides and not up inside the circle. Do those things and your fishing rod, and if you're using it in salt water, wash it off. Your fishing rods will last quite a long time as well. So there you have my top 5 tips for using a spinning reel. If you want to see how to make better casts with that, check out my video on the top 5 casts all spinning rod anglers should know.